Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I am honored to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Robert May, and I am the Executive Director of the Kensington, an assisted living and memory care community in Redondo Beach, California. When the opportunity to partner with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles was presented, the Kensington team was thrilled to support their efforts and design and sponsor an exciting series of 4 book club webinars. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are. Kensington Senior Living was founded in 2010 by a leadership team with over 30 years of experience in developing and operating premier senior living residents in the United States and abroad. We understand the difficult decision in placing a loved one into a senior retirement community. The Kensington promise is simple yet profound: to love and care for your family as we do our own. This is a core to our belief that no aspect of caregiving is more important than our partnership with our residents and their families at every stage of aging. We have 2 communities in Southern California, one in Redondo Beach, another in Sierra Madre. In addition, we have a dedicated memory care community in Redwood City and a newest community in Reston, Virginia. We provide exceptional assisted living and extraordinary memory care solutions for our families. It is exciting that Kensington Senior Living and the Library Foundation of Los Angeles have partnered together to host a series of short story book club webinars for existing residents and families. I am also personally thrilled. It seems that there's always someone that has inspired us to pursue, motivate, induce, and encourage the discipline of reading. I have been an avid collector of books my entire life and was shown the beauty of literature at a very early age. My mother was a dedicated nurse and also a poet who created delicate and moving poems and stories which engendered my passion for poetry and literature, which continues to reverberate and influence my life and career as an executive director, but also as composer of contemporary classical music. Poetry has inspired all of my musical compositions. The power of the written and spoken word has changed me and greatly influenced the way I experience the world around me. Today, we will continue our journey into understanding the power, artifice, and magic of writing and storytelling with our series of short story webinars featuring guest author Amy Hempel. We are grateful to have author Susan Minot curate this wonderful series and present Jessica Strand as our moderator. Jessica is the Director of Public Programs at the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. Previously, she has worked in programming for the Alexandria House, the Strand Bookstore, and the New York Public Library, before most recently founding the cultural initiative Dear America. Strand has contributed to many publications, including the LA Times, Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and more. She's an editor and an author over a dozen cookbooks and literary anthologies. Please join me in welcoming Jessica Strand with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles and our moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, Robert, so much for that. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. And I'm very excited, as is the Library Foundation, about this series and partnership. I can't think of something more wonderful, and the gift of literature is something very special to me, obviously, in my life as well. But for those who are not familiar with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, the Library Foundation of Los Angeles is a nonprofit that provides vital support to the Los Angeles Public Library. The Library Foundation also presents public programs covering a wide range of subjects, engaging some of the great thinkers and artists of our time. Today, I'm very excited to introduce the writer Susan Minot. I was lucky enough several years back to interview her at the New York Public Library, where I had a program called Books at Noon. And Susan was one of the people I interviewed. And from there, our friendship blossomed. Susan has written numerous books, novels, books of short stories, poetry, plays, screenplays. She even paints and draws beautifully. Her list of accomplishments is impressive and her gifts numerous. In this 4-part series, she will guide us along with some of the great writers of our era, each of them master of a short story in their own way. And she'll look more closely at this genre. Today, our program is the second in the series, and she and the wonderful short story journalist Amy Hempel will be in conversation. Please remember the Q&A box at the end or during the conversation for questions, because we would love, I will be moderating the questions at the end, but I know that Amy and Susan would love to hear your questions. So without further ado, Susan, please, I welcome Susan Minot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Very happy to be there. And there's Amy, my dear longtime friend. So we're going to, as for those of you who sort of registered early enough, you know that we had a PDF of one of Amy's stories called A Full Service Shelter. And we're going to be talking about that story, but we will really try to, it shouldn't matter if you haven't read it, we'll try to talk about sort of short stories and in general. And I'm so pleased to have Amy, who is truly a master of the short story. She's also the master of the short, which is even more, I would say, drifting very close to poetry in form. Amy is a teacher of writing, and I'll give you the list of some of her books. Her first book of stories, Reasons to Live, At the Gates of the Animal Kingdom, Tumble Home, The Dog of the Marriage, the collected stories of Amy Hempel, which won the Rhea Award for the short story, and most recently, the book that we're talking about today called Sing to It. She's also been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Ambassador Book Award, the Penn Malamud Story Award, and the John William Corrington Award for Literary Excellence from Centenary College. She has taught at Bennington for a long time. She taught at Harvard University. Now she teaches at Stony Brook, where we happen to share some students because I'm teaching there too, and is taking a semester at the Michener Center at the University of Texas in Austin. Everyone who's been able to have Amy as a teacher is always very enthusiastic about her. She is incredible. I wanted to read just a few things about some of her work. Most recently, James Wood in the New Yorker talked about the importance of course, stories are important. I mean, sentences are important in every story, but Amy is particularly, she's like a chiseler with her stories. And he says, her stories assemble extraordinary sentences, and each purified sentence is itself a story, a kind of suspended enigma. Her sentences are not complex, but the speed of their connection to one another is a little breathtaking. So very much like poetry. And here's an example of one of the lines from the beginning of a story. Between them, it was always almost over, especially at the start. You think, wait, hang on, I have to think about that for a moment. Her characters and narrators are often a bit eccentric, often solitary or even antisocial, and drift at the fringes of things, nursing remembered pain and relishing the companionship of a dog. But their despair is subdued by the solace of intelligence, wit, and tart stoicism. So I'm so happy to introduce you to Amy Hempel.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you and this wonderful partnership for the invitation. It is quite an honor to be part of this series, and I'm delighted to get to talk with you today.
Good, good. So for people who haven't, I mean, maybe we should just dive in and hear a little bit of,
Sure.
of the full service shelter so people can
Service
get a
shelter.
sample of that fabulous prose that I'm bragging on.
Okay. The only thing, I'm going to read very briefly. The only thing you need to know is that the they, you'll keep hearing, they knew us, they knew me. They are the dogs in a shelter. They knew us as the ones who got tetanus shots and rabies shots, the latter still a series, but no longer in the stomach, and who closed the bites and gashes on our arms with crazy glue, not the medical grade, but the kind you find at hardware stores, instead of going for stitches to the ER, where we would have had to report the dog, who would then be put to death. They knew us as the ones who argued the names assigned at intake, saying, who will adopt a dog named Nixon? And when Nixon's name was changed to Dahmer, we ragged on them again, then just let it go when the final name assigned was OG, Original Gangster. There was always a baby on one of the wards so that staff could write on the kennel card, no one puts baby in the corner. And they finally stopped using Precious after a senior kennel worker said of a noble, aged body, I fucking hate this name, but this is a good dog. Though often they got it right. They named the cowboy-colored pocket pit, who thought he was a big stud, Man. They knew us as the ones who put our fingers in mouths to retrieve a watch, a cell phone, a red bicycle reflector that a dog sucked on like a lozenge. I'm going to stop there. It gets a little harsh after that, and I'll think, I'll stop right there.
It's a killer story. I mean, not to make a pun.
Literally.
Yes, because full service, what does that mean in this story?
I will, happy to tell you that. And I'll preface it by saying, this is a true story, and I can speak to why I still call it fiction in a moment. There is a shelter. This is a real shelter. It's a high kill shelter in East Harlem, Manhattan. I did work there as a volunteer for a couple of years, and I remember vividly working one afternoon and hearing, I guess a board member was visiting and sort of boasting to someone he was showing around that this was a full service shelter. And I thought, oh, I wonder, what else do they do? Do they give them special, wonderful massages and baths, like a spa experience? No, of course not. I learned within 5 minutes the full service was death. They killed the dogs. That was a full, so it was in the story, I call it a civic boast, a full service shelter. But that's what the full service is. And the whole experience was like that. And the reason I do call this, and not just call it fiction, but believe it to work as fiction, though it is factual, is because of the point of view. Because it's written from the point of view of the dogs. Obviously, I have to make that up.
So you're describing their point of view, saying this is what they saw.
This
right? That phrase is repeated throughout the story. They knew us as the ones who, gave them a walk and cleaned out their cages.
It is entirely from their point of view. And I hadn't planned to write about this place or my working there, but I'm sure many of your listeners have done or currently doing some kind of volunteer work. And if you're a writer who does some volunteer work, chances are you're doing it not to have something to write about. You're doing it because it's another passion in your life. And that's what this was: dogs, cats, animals. And it didn't occur to me to write about it until I was rereading a favorite story, a short story by Lenny Michaels called In the 50s. And there was a sentence I'd read many times over. I'm trying to find it right now, that I used as the epigraph. It's a very autobiographical story, and he worked in an animal research lab, and he's talking about the apes that were being experimented on. He says, they knew me as one who shot reeking crap out of cages with a hose. And at this point in my working in the shelter, I reread that line and I thought, oh my God, that's how to tell this story.
And that's how they knew you. And in fact, you have that line, I think a couple of times in the story, right?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
So the point of view, there had been I learned this later, and I didn't read it till after I had written my story, but some years earlier, it turned out there had been an expose, a nonfiction piece, expose of the same place in a magazine. I think the title was Helter Shelter.
Wow.
And I didn't notice that much of anything had changed as a result of a very fine article. And doing the work itself, I've been thinking lately, especially during the pandemic, but just anyway, thinking about what are the things any one of us does in a given day that while we're doing it, we don't feel we should be doing something else.
Many things.
Those things seem to me to have a real connection to our souls, if that doesn't sound too corny. And when I was doing this work with these dogs in terrible conditions, I never, ever, ever thought or wished I were somewhere else. Thought I should be somewhere else, doing anything else. And yet, I didn't know how it was I was going to be able to do this work because it was so entirely heartbreaking. And then a good friend reminded me of what I think is a Buddhist notion. If not, it could be. And she said, well, doing it makes you able to do it. And I thought, well, let's see about that. Let's see about that. Doing it makes you able to do it. And then I also thought, okay, yes, this is heartbreaking, but my feelings don't matter here. I'm here to make them feel better. So I'll have my feelings later. And
well, I think that, I don't know if this is Buddhist so much, but the kind of, when you surrender to duty outside of yourself, I think you definitely feel, and here it's a choice. You're passionate about dogs. I remember reading once you said, or maybe you told me this, that when someone says face, you don't think of a human face, you think of a dog face. Like
I told you that, yes.
Yeah. They're very, very, so they're very close to you, but I think that, but then again, serving in this kind of dire situation, it would wear you down too much after a while. And I think you really get to those things in the story. And that's kind of another place that fiction goes, that nonfiction sort of isn't supposed to go. Nonfiction, you're not supposed to get into the difficulty of your feelings or how hard it is to write about. And this story manages to sort of touch upon all those things. You also have the, I think, ability to be funny about some really dark things here, which isn't sort of supposed to happen in nonfiction the same way. And
I think that's true. Yeah, I think you're right. And there was an element of this job, I don't think it was in what I just read, but that ended up being the most important writing I've ever done in my life, because in addition to naming the dogs as they came in as strays or whatever, to try to get them adopted out of that place. There was a woman who was a terrific photographer, and she would take extraordinarily appealing portraits of each dog. And then a few of us, including myself, would write these irresistible bios of each dog. So we would hang out with each of them and for a short time and kind of get to know them, and then write these little bios. And I mean, what could be, this was literal life and death writing. You know, if somebody
Yes.
saw a description of a dog and thought, I gotta go meet that little guy, you know?
Right. So there's your writing directly affecting which is what as writers we hope for, right? We hope that
Yes.
it gives you, you know, a new lease on life, perhaps, or, you know, that it's helpful in some way.
And it was quite something, you know, to realize. And also in this story, I gave myself the freedom to do something I tried to keep out of all my other work, which was, I hate sentimentality in writing. Who doesn't? You know, there's not a speck of it.
Not everyone does
well,
it. Yeah.
You know, that's right. There's not a speck of it in your work, for example. And I always patrol my work to, you know, try and get rid of anything that smacks of sentimentality. But in this story, I thought, what if I didn't? What if I just let it go? And I mean, let it be there. And so consequently, there's a moment when the narrator leans over to a puppy in the shelter and says, oh, how did you get so cute? Now, I would kill myself before having, you know, a line like that in another story.
Mm-hmm. But I think that, you know, you're very, you know, you're very sensitive to not overstating things. You're very sensitive to the sort of reserve that really makes wit work well in your stories. And I think in this, we have, yes, puppy dogs, how cute, but they're in this nightmare of a shelter where every once in a while you'll mention, you know, oh, the drug that sort of, you know, kills them most gently has been withdrawn because someone needed to fix the floor in the front of the, you know,
that was the choice. Yeah.
Just these horrors. But I wanted to just read this one thing that made me think of, you just let it, you just allowed for like emotion to go in and kind of cuteness to go in, but it works here. And this is one, again, there's this litany of they knew me as, this one's they knew me as one, and this is quite near the end of the story when there hasn't been that much emotion that the narrator has really kind of, you know, fessed up to. They knew me as one who got jacked up on rage and didn't know what to do with it until a dog dug a ball from a corner of his kennel and brought it to my side as though to ask, have you thought of this?
Thank you for singling out that moment. A true moment.
So good. And there are other moments, you know, they knew me as one who watched. I mean, the stretch that the narration happens, it's very fictional. You know, they knew me as one who watched a dog pretending to lift his paw to someone who wasn't even there in a cage.
Lifting his paw.
No, none of the dogs knew you as doing, you know what I mean? So
no, that's, again, you're right. That is entirely fictional.
Right.
But, it was just an interesting thing to experiment with. And, you know, partly as a result, I actually long before this story, I borrowed something from our friend, the wonderful writer, Mona Simpson, who years ago, I don't know if she still does this, but years ago, I'd heard from one of her former students that her advice to young writers as a teacher was to do volunteer work. And I thought, what a brilliant thing to do for her to say. And I borrow that from her, and I often,
How interesting. I'm going to borrow that too. That's
well, help
excellent.
yourself, because think of it, at the bottom line, you're going to do some good. You're going to help somebody in some way, whether it's crisis intervention or, dog shelter or habitat for humanity. You're going to do something crucial. Um, you're going to start in the white hot center of the experience, because there's no need or time for anything extraneous, but get to work. Let's work on this problem, whatever the problem is. And it's quite an honor. I think it's really a privilege to be around people who are in agreement that we're going to do this hard, necessary thing together. And let's not waste time. Let's be large-hearted about this. And if you get into that habit in another context, another realm entirely, it does carry over into the rest of your life. And I know I'm a better writer with the various kinds of volunteer work I've done, over the years.
That's such a good suggestion. It really is.
I mean, we always tell people, well, read, just keep reading. Just read a lot, read good work. And of course I believe that.
Yes, I think that making better habits as a person is one thing, but it kind of describes a little bit of a state of mind you sometimes want to be in when you're writing.
Yes.
Which is
exactly.
Being right into it quickly, not thinking you're doing this for, and I even, it's something you do alone, but I'm surrounded with books and the writers that I've read thinking, we're doing this together, you're doing this too. And it does help to not feel that you're, because there's so much kind of isolation involved in the concentration, right?
Yeah. So that story probably means the most to me. We did get a lot.
Well, what happens is you do this, I won't say the same thing that you do in your other stories, but you apply the same interest that you take that shows up in your other story. Mainly, I would say, number one, an attention to language. Like, I mean, obviously a writer gives attention to language, but you actually, it's a subject, this interesting, phrasing. There's a lot of quoting people's sort of interesting way of speaking. There's a lot of, it's, you just feel like there's the pleasure the narrator gets in using the language of, say, this place, youth list instead of euthanasia list, or the vet tech, or the resources guard. What's that?
Just the sound of it, as you read, the sound, vet tech.
That's right. And you don't describe, we pick it up. We sort of understand what it is. And liking, I like this phrase, the ideal version of. That's good for a dog, but I don't like comfort zone when we get to, and you never, in most of the things, I mean, this is particularly like this because it's sort of a mosaic of scenes sort of over the years of this narrator working here. But so we get the classic Amy Hempel anecdote packed into this, which is another way that you both break our hearts and make us laugh. And they're always sort of thematically connected, but they go off in kind of unexpected ways. And I think that that lack of expectation is another thing that you see a mile away. You think it's going to be like this, and it turns out to either be better or to be worse. You think something's good and it's not, or something should be this way and it's, sort of crazily unjust or something.
Yeah, and
a real eye for that.
Well, overturning expectations, to the extent I can identify expectations, has been a long time favorite thing to do on the page. That probably is in person too, you know, just in dealings with people. Oh, you think I'm going to be like this? Well,
Yeah.
guess what? I'm like that. I'm going to be like that instead.
Well, it's because we're not encouraged to do that, right? There's a lot that we're not encouraged to do in getting along with people in the world. And so that's a place that I think I certainly know that I go to fiction to see someone being a little more sort of fresh and straightforward about it. But I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about the short story, and I know that your first line is very important to you in making a story. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of my literary heroes has always been Grace Paley, and the late Grace Paley, and she said at some point that when she had come up with a sentence she knew would open a story, she knew she had a story. She knew she could do the whole story once she identified her opening line. I had to go, I needed more. I needed a first line I liked, and I needed the last line also.
And that's all it takes. You just fill it in. That's how you write a
Just fill it
story.
in, A to B. And if only. And of course, I've never known what's in between. But really, every story I've written, I knew the last line when I started. And it's, I would never dream of saying, yes, you must know. No, it's a little odd mystery. I don't know.
Well, it's like you, I mean, it brings me back to my feeling of you as a poet. It's like you're seeing the unit of the story you're going to tell. And in a way that poems are kind of a unit, in a way that novels aren't so much, you know? And so it's like you know what needs to be in between just to sort of cover the terrain that you want to explore in the piece.
And I need to know, and I need to know where I'm going. I need to know, okay, this is going to be really hard, but no one's forcing me. No one's making me do this. So that's irrelevant, but it's going to be hard. But I have to know.
Only you're making yourself do it, which is.
But I have to know, I don't care how hard this is because I'm going to end up there. And it has to be a place I'm eager to go. I'm eager to get to. And I think that's why I do need to know the last line at the start.
Do you ever have the last line first?
Yeah.
Yeah. You just need the two of them. You're not quite sure yet.
Need the two.
I mean, wasn't it E.L. Doctorow who said that writing is like driving in a car at night, and you see as far as the headlights in the road. I mean, we never quite think of this, like we're zooming along, but we're only seeing 20 feet in front of us. Like, but you know where, like, you know the house that you're going to get to and exactly what it's going to look like. Often I would say this is more the way I would write a story. I know that I'm headed to a hill town. I'm not quite sure where I'm going to stop in the hill town, or there may be a porch involved somehow, you know, or something like that. It's
I love
not
that.
as specific as, you know, but you know exactly the place you're going to anchor the, you know.
Well, I need it in language. I need the language, as you said, because that's what I start with is the language. And, you know, I have friends, you do too, who you say, oh, what kind of writer are you? And instead of saying, I'm a novelist, they'll say, I'm a storyteller. I've heard this from several novelist friends. I'm a storyteller, because that's how they see themselves first. I have a story to tell. That would never occur to me, although I write stories.
Right.
I would say, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
Because, I'm telling stories. Because it's not the impulse that gets me there.
I agree.
Something different.
I'm a sentence writer.
I'm a sentence writer.
Or a half a sentence writer. Or a that makes me want to read one of your you know, you're famous for writing very short stories, shorts. There are, you know, a page, a paragraph, 2 pages often. But here's, I think, is this your shortest? This is one as if you started this one and then you realized what the last line was before you finished. It's a 1-line short story called
Memoir.
Memoir. Well, you probably know it by heart.
You'd think. You'd better
Okay.
read it. You'd better.
It is just memoir. Just once in my life. Oh, when have I ever wanted anything just once in my life?
Luckily, I have an editor, Nan Graham, who agreed that that was a story.
I agree. It is. Like you just
Not-
went right to the end.
I start with the
Instead of
end.
having to fill it in with sort of elaborating on it, you know, it's quite.
That
very
is the
beautiful.
shortest. That is
Yeah.
the shortest. But as I often point out, Gertrude Stein had a shorter story. And
Did
it
she?
was-
What is it?
and it was it's titled Longer, and Gertrude Stein. And the story, here's the whole story. She stayed away longer. Okay, pretty
Okay.
short.
Yeah. Lot could be filled in.
Yeah, yeah.
So as I say, I often have students that have studied with you and they adore you and they want to write a whole different way after they've taken the class with you.
And vice versa. Vice versa. You bet.
But this is about you, my darling. But thank you. What would you gave very good advice that Mona Simpson gave to her students. Is there one thing, like, I don't know how many, I know maybe some of my students actually are tuning in today. And if there are, I think there are many, many people who don't even dare say it, but they're always thinking, I've sort of wanted to write and I maybe want to, what would be, you know, one or two things that you would say to them?
Well, one thing is, as I said, probably the most often given answer, which is to read great writer. And by great writers, it could be classics, it could be anyone else has heard of, but you want. My former long time ago teacher put it this way. He said, in terms of reading, finding the writers who just you feel so aligned with, he said, you want people who pray in the same church you do. And when you come across, I have the sacred shelf, and I can read literally the last 2 lines of Middlemarch and be weeping as much as I wept the first time I read them. I can get that effect from the last line of the last story in Dennis Johnson's Jesus the Son, the last line of Beverly
Amazing.
Home. This,
Yeah.
The waterworks begin.
Yes.
So it's what makes you want to write. I might cry at a performance of a favorite singer, but I can't sing, but I have this notion. I had this notion long ago when I was made to cry at the end of Middlemarch. And I wonder if I could do that. Could I do that? I want to make somebody feel the way I was just made to feel. And then you find the people who do that to you and you study them and you study them. And it's not about reading, bestseller, be reading it, whatever somebody gives you as a gift. No. You have to really go out and research the people who.
Or just, even if someone gives you something, if you don't like it, we're not in school anymore.
We're not in school.
You don't read it. Just read. I mean, Faulkner said, read everything you can get your hands on. High literature, pulp fiction, trash. Just whatever it is that compels you. You read it,
Sure.
and then you can try, you know, I think you try to sort of do it like they do it. And then you realize I can't do it like they do it. It turns out this is where my, you know, this is where my material is. And
And
this
you
is
ask,
how I'm going to do it. You know,
and yeah,
I'm
and you ask
not going to
yourself,
be as funny as Lori Moore. I
yeah,
just can't.
none of us are going to be that funny. But the question, the better question in mind to keep in mind is, but who am I different from? You know, what can I do that's entirely mine? You know, and
Mhm.
then so I would say that, long-winded, I would say that, but and I would also say just have another. Well, you know, what obsesses you? Pay attention to what you're obsessed with. Pursue other obsessions. I remember long ago another literary hero, Mary Robeson, saying in some interview that this many years ago that the experience of taking photographs of you know composing a photograph helped her frame a scene, and so you know it can be that almost you know that translatable sometimes, but I guess that's what I would say to that.
I think there is it's I just read a Miles Davis quote recently, said, "It took me a long time to play like myself."
Oh,
Right? So
that's good.
you know, and you think, Miles Davis, you
Oh,
must have started playing like yourself right away. But no, you know, and it takes a long time to find that out, right?
yeah,
And it's sort of, but
yeah,
you know, the the other important thing, I think, advice for people starting to write is don't think about it, just do it.
yeah,
You know, just start writing, and you learn something comes out maybe a little bit differently than you thought it would. And
yeah,
maybe that's not bad. And you go back and you're like, I'm not sure anyone's ever quite that I've come across has sort of said this way with,
mhm,
you know, and because each person is so different, there's going to be, if you really, you know, stick to your uniqueness,
yeah.
you're going to write something different than what anyone else has written.
And one more quick Grace Paley quotation. I love what she said about revision for writers and people studying writing. She said, well, you have to go back over it and make sure every word is true. And of course, she didn't mean factually true. She meant emotionally true. And I thought, that's good advice. Yeah,
Mhm.
emotionally true.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
mm,
George Saunders talks about going back over and thinking of his reader and thinking she's a little smarter than me. She's got a good sense of humor and she doesn't want to be any this namby-pamby business, you know, and I want to lose her. So I want to make sure I'm up to my game, right?
yeah,
You sort of, and that's when you know, sort of think how you're telling the story and what to give in
absolutely.
and what to give out.
Absolutely.
When I was, you know, your sort of attention to language as a, you know, real kind of lifeline to experience, I came across this Toni Morrison. It was in an interview. She said,
Mhm.
we die. That may be the meaning of life,
Oh,
but
mhm.
we do language. That may be the measure of our lives.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, that's lovely.
You
I
know,
think and accurate
what's that?
and accurate. I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So when you think of your reader, or do you think of your reader when you're writing?
I think of my readers by name. I
Are they?
think
Do
of
they have tails and two ears?
oh sometimes. No, I mean I've always, almost always, written for ideally a handful of people. Um, I mean, two of them are now dead, but I'm still writing for them.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking, okay, if this one thinks or would have might have thought this worked, I'm good. I don't have to worry.
Right.
Um,
God, that's
I found that
good.
helpful. Yeah.
I think I maybe better narrow down. I think I have a crowd out there, a sea of faces, and I'm like, I get disoriented, you know?
Well, it is disorienting. And I know that people will say, well, I write for myself to please myself. I'm like, well,
No. Well,
that
because
isn't
the
good.
point is you're trying to connect to, you're trying to put out something that you want to share.
Right. So
Right?
that never really made sense to me.
That's the whole impulse.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what they're saying is they're just saying, I have to be my own counsel. Like, I'm the one who's finally going to decide if this is worth it or not. But you need, I mean, for me, it's like all the writers I've read that I love, the musicians, the artists, I need all those handholds to help me. Is it, should I, and not, and that, and,
Yeah.
it takes a lot
Yeah.
of discernment.
And if I might just make a very quick plug, I think that people watching already know of your exquisite recent book, Why I Don't Write, but so that's a known thing to read, a known book to read. I'm finishing up right now Joanne Beard's new book,
Oh.
Festival Days.
Mm-hmm.
I want to recommend most highly.
That's good. We should put that in the chat so people
Festival
can. I think we'll
Days,
get Jess to put that in the chat.
Joanne
So
Beard.
people, by Joanne Beard. Yes, I was just reading about it. It looks really good.
Exquisite, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was just a little digression.
No, plug. That's one of the things we had talked about in the series of mentioning other writers. We've mentioned Grace Paley. We've mentioned Middlemarch by George Eliot. Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son, incredible collection of short stories. I always teach one story called Emergency.
Wow, that is a gem. That's a gem. Yeah.
That's like a big long poem also.
It is a big long poem. And also it's in that category I think we think of as good as it gets.
Yes.
Good as it gets.
It couldn't be better. What else can we talk about?
Well, I was going to say, you write poetry as well as fiction and all, and I really do. I think part of my love for language and putting it first when I'm writing is that I would write poetry if I could. So I've always gone as close as I can get to it. I think
you did. Listen, Amy, I bet if you just had, line breaks at the end instead of going to the whole having paragraph, so many of your stories would just equal poems.
Well, it's lovely of you to say, but the problem is I don't know where to break a line.
Right. You could just have someone, you could have your nice editor do that, and
you could hire a line breaker.
Yeah.
I just don't get it,
Yes.
I don't know.
There was one story that I actually assigned my class. I'm teaching a class on the short story, and it's one of your early stories called The Harvest. And the thing that's wonderful about that story is it's about a terrible car crash that the narrator is in. Mm-hmm. And, in very Amy Hempel-like way, we get the funny things the lawyer says and the phrases for this and that she lies about how many stitches are in her leg. And it seems like, there's the man who goes back to his wife that she was in the crash with. And so you get this real story going on, the aftermath of a trauma. And then 5 pages into the story, you say, I'm going to read it to not paraphrase. You say,
is that I leave
out a lot when I tell the truth. The same when I write a story. I'm going to start now to tell you what I have left out of The Harvest and maybe begin to wonder why I had to leave it out. And then the next part of the story is about, well, this really did happen and that really didn't. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It turned out when that appeared, when I wrote that and it was published however many years ago, at the same time.
Yeah, 98.
Oh, goodness, you know that. So
Yeah.
at the same time, it turned out Tim O'Brien, the amazing Tim O'Brien, we'd done the same thing in stories at the same time. He
Wow.
published a story that was in The Things They Carried called Speaking of Courage. And it was followed by, I can't remember if he says note, note or note, but there's a break at the story. And then he comes back and talks about what ostensibly was changed from the reality, the
That's
real
right.
version. And I thought,
Mhm.
isn't that fascinating? This writer who I revere so much, we're doing the same thing, and in our own territories. And it always interests me when you write from, and I write from a lot from experience, my own experience, but it's always interesting to see why you change what really happened, why you need to change, why you make changes for story you wouldn't have predicted, and you do it without even thinking about it. And I remember teaching once with Tim at a conference, and he said, we talked about this, and he said something about how it remained a paradox to him, like, why you could have this incredibly dramatic thing happen to you for real, but it wouldn't work presented just the same on the page.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that the narrator in the story says, like, this happened, this coincidence happened, this coincidence, but that would have just been too much if I put it in the story, because the story asks for a kind of surprise and subtlety. I think that in life we're allowed to say, you can't believe it, I walked right into her on the.
And the writer Alice Madison some years ago published a wonderful essay about coincidence and why we so enjoy it in life, but we don't trust it on the page. It's like, oh, that was convenient.
Right.
Coincidence in a story. Oh, that worked out well. And she really nailed it. She's really right.
So are you writing new things now?
I'm not. I'm reading a lot. I'm reading my students' work. I'm reading for a prize, which I love doing. Prize judging.
It takes up a lot of time. So
a lot of time.
Yeah.
I love doing it. And also, I hadn't planned to write I don't write for a long time after I have a book come out, and Sing to It came out in 2019, which feels to me like yesterday.
Right.
So,
yes.
Not writing.
Yes.
It is
yesterday.
It is yesterday. What about you? Are you writing now?
Well, I'm working on something that I've been working on for 5, I don't want to say 6 years, because then I'll really feel that I published these stories I was writing things on the side, like to at least have something head out into the world. And then I had some old stories that had never been collected. And so, it shouldn't, in theory, have slipped out in between. I should have had this, what was supposed to be a novella, and now it's turned into a novel, which basically, as a student was asking, well, so what's the difference between a novella and a short story and a novel? I said, short story goes up to 40 pages, and novella goes up to 90 pages. And then after, right, it's really just about length. So it just got longer.
But scope too, don't you think?
Yes, but you can't have a short story that's 90 pages. You
Sure
know,
can. Yeah.
there's a cutoff, definite.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
there's a sort of, 40, 50 pages. Is it a story or a novella? I mean, I think, Alice Munro is the person who's really sort of stretched the short
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
to, I won't say allowed to be longer, but she puts in often the scope of a novel in there. So
Absolutely.
that's just to mess with your head,
And so brilliantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe write again soon. No hurry. Not in a hurry.
That's good because I feel like anxiousness every morning I wake up. Got to get to
Really?
it. Yeah.
Wait,
And
but you
sort of-
want to or you have to?
No, I have to. Like, I'd maybe rather do that, but I know I need to stick with this and finish. It's not
Yeah.
as sort of intriguing. The last part of trying to pull something together. The intriguing part is the sort of first discovery. I don't know if you have that. You seem to have it all sewn up. Just fill in between the first line and the last line.
Yeah, it's the just do
That's
it.
all.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard Lori Moore talking about when she writes a story. At least she was talking about one of the stories she'd written, and she wrote that sort of beginning part, and then she wrote the last part, and then went and thought, okay, how much do I need to connect them?
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
Which is sort of the opposite of Chekhov's advice to a young writer, which is, often a story you can take off the beginning and take off the end, and that's your story.
That's fascinating. I never heard that.
Yes.
I should have.
He was saying that's usually, he was talking about beginning writers mostly, but he said it's usually at the beginning and the end when the writer is kind of, not being as truthful.
Oh, okay.
Interesting,
Well,
right?
that's really interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I should take your class.
Yeah, but then how would you, but your beginning and your end is the essence of it.
Oh, no.
Just a different way. Said a different way. But did you know Chekhov wrote like 600 short stories?
Did he really? I knew it was.
I mean, some of them were little short, pieces for the newspaper, and he was, trained as a doctor, but in his time, and he had to look after sort of a large family, and being a doctor, because he did his duty, volunteer, and did a lot of work with the serfs who couldn't pay him. And so he made his living writing. He became a writer to make some money, which is very hard to picture, right?
Wow. Well, conjure with that. Why don't we?
Yeah. Wrote plays and.
God, you teach some of his stories regularly, don't you? Or a couple?
I'm teaching a short story class right now. Yeah.
But I think over the years that you've taught, you include, you teach his work.
Who's? Oh, sorry. Chekhov.
Chekhov.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's my hero. He's at the top of the heap.
Understandable.
Yeah. I think we're gonna get Jessica to come in.
Oh, okay.
To see if we have some questions from our audience.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I did put in the sort of universal chat to everybody the Joanne Beard Festival Days book.
Thank you.
A great writer, and I think many people are not as familiar as they should be with her work. So, so thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, we have a number of questions, and then I thought I wanted to ask you guys a couple of questions after that, just about length of short story. Maybe I'll start it with, the idea of sort of the haiku and poetry as a form. And then with something like a short story, you've got your short stories, Amy, and I think of someone like Lydia Davis and other people who just have these, it could be a paragraph, it could be a line. And how do you know? How do you know when as you were saying, your editor, that Nan Graham said, well, that's complete, or in the case of, I can't remember who you mentioned, who wrote the short story that was also a line, but seemed
Gertrude Stein.
Yeah, Gertrude Stein. So my question is, like, how does somebody know if a new writer or somebody who doesn't have an editor who's saying, look, this is a story, what do you say? How do you write that line and feel it is complete? What does it take to know, as a young writer or as an older writer, but as somebody who's trying to write a short story?
Well, a short, I like the definition or description that came from the late Irving Howe. He said, a short is like a regular story, only more so. So anything you would consider in engaging the success or failure of any story, it's even more so with the very, very short ones. But there are so many different kinds. They can do different things. I mean, there's, the contemporary fable or parable, or shorts that come off like jokes, or that are like a light bulb going off, over your head. This moment of stunning recognition. I mean, does it do anything like that? Did anything change? Let's say there's a 2-sentence story. You feel you've written a short story that's only 2 lines. Well, did something change in the second sentence from the first sentence? Is there any movement? I mean, those are some things that come immediately to mind.
I think that it's interesting, because I do think that even if everyone isn't a writer, everyone kind of understands what a story is. Like, you're literally sitting around the fire, and you say, and this and this and this, and everyone's like, and then what?
And
or and then they, and so they walked off down the road, and everyone's like, okay. That the story's over. There isn't, as George Saunders has written a beautiful book that just came out this summer called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And it's basically, he writes down a class that he teaches on Russian short stories to his writing students at Syracuse. And he's so good at sort of articulating the way a story is written and analyzing a story, like this one did it this way and this one did it that. And he talks about it, not using sort of scary literary terms. And he's like, what are the balls that are in the air here? And that's when you're like, and then, and well, what happened to the guy who came out of the door there? And it's like, well, he shouldn't have been in the story if he didn't return, and you only put in the things because we know how to listen to a story. Children do. Yeah, they're like, well, that's not a story. You didn't finish the story. So you sort of put on that hat after you've written and think, okay, if I were just reading this, where is something? And so that's why the story memoir, for just once in my life, and then you realize, actually, if I comment on that phrase, it's going to say a lot about my life attitude, right?
Exactly.
Or about our life attitude. Like, no one ever, that phrase is funny because for once in my life, people usually use it when it's something that they really want constantly, right?
All the time, yes.
So it's just this, so that ends up being, a nugget of wisdom that we experience just as one phrase is kind of analyzed and reversed, right? And that's enough of a story.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yeah.
But it's back to, again, it's overturning the expectation. It's taking a proverb or a saying or a cliche and flipping it.
To be the exact opposite. And then when you put a title on it, memoir,
yes,
then you've got the, enough elements.
No, I mean, I can think of like a line stories or 2 or 3 line stories that I mean, I find them, it doesn't matter the length. Being moved by something, you're moved by something.
Right. And it's also, it's a good exercise when you're wanting to write of like, wait, let me think if I really need to boil this down. And if you can boil it down, boil it down. Like no one, you don't want to drift, and we may feel like we luxuriate in a novel, but believe me, those sentences are all excellent, and they're just giving us a dreamy feeling. We're not getting, more than we want.
Well, that's a question that about language, about choice of language, about when you're editing. Do you read do you read your work aloud to see how it sounds? I mean, when you two were talking about choosing language, I thought to myself, I had heard someone once say, have every sentence sing, have it sing. And so and then what I think to myself is, as you read it aloud, does it have that melodic feeling of almost a piece of music? You've chosen words in a way that there's a rhythm that makes sense and that the story is being told. So I guess my question is, when you edit, before you're just writing and you're choosing language and you're thinking, do you then read, as you rewrite these paragraphs aloud to yourself, to listen to how they would hear in them, like not just in your own mind as you put them out, but how the reader might hear them, I guess. And that's the most obtuse question. But
no, but Amy is definitely, she's a very melodic writer. I mean, her sentences.
So are you, but so are you. And I bet you do what I do, Sue, because I read aloud to myself from the minute the word hits the page. It's not later. It's from the start, because you can hear.
I can do that in my head, but it's definitely, you're listening to it. You're listening to the words, and when you say you want it to sing, yes, but you don't want not every sentence wants to be a reversal, and not everyone wants to shine. Some want to be quiet, and some want to be, abrupt, and some want to be, so you, like a symphony, you think, where's this for a while? And I mean, the story we were talking about is very much like a song with a refrain. We just keep on the violins come in the same way, and then we get a little bit of I don't write music, and I don't even know how to do it, but I often think of it that way too,
Right. And I think, as you were indicating, Susan, that the importance of not every sentence being this melodic, lyrical thing. You do want to vary it, of course. And sometimes I just find myself reminding myself, if I get all balled up in something, I remind myself, just talk it out. Just talk it out. Forget being writerly, just, if I were just explaining it to you, say it. And I just want to quickly give an example of one of the most moving sentences I've ever read that is just talked out. The poet Mark Doty, in his first memoir, Heaven's Coast, has just written of the moment of the death of his longtime partner. Okay, and here's the next sentence that always slays me. He writes, "The heat in him lasted a long time."
Wow.
all very simple words, very
Simple
short,
words,
not elaborating.
no special effects, and it kills you. It kills you.
Tells you, yeah.
Mhm.
There are two questions here. One is, I'm going to sort of boil this question down because, and it's to you, Amy, and it has to do with empathy, really.
Empathy.
Empathy. I mean,
Empathy.
the question is, you're somebody who can, one of the reasons I love your writing so much is because you can tell how you feel or understand animals the way I do, which is so rare to me. Why are we like this? And, I mean, that's to you. I mean, this is a great passion of yours. And so I give it over to you just for,
For our last answer, I think.
Last answer. Okay. I understand them. They understand me. Animals have saved my life once, quite literally, and many times over emotionally, over a lifetime. I get them. They get me.
Everyone, thank you, Amy. I know we're going to go dark in a few minutes here, and I just didn't want us to be abrupted by the time running out.
Okay.
And that's going to happen in about 2 minutes. So, but I wanted to thank all of you, Amy, for sharing your wonderful stories and experiences and creating those wonderful doggy bios to save our four-legged friends. Okay, I love that story. And Susan, for guiding us along the path of writing. We got so many great quotes today, references to new writers that we have to read, writers I have not discovered yet, and you've shared with me today. But I love all the quotes, writing is the measure of our lives. And, it's just been a fabulous journey. Thank you for all of you opening your hearts and sharing your experiences and visions as artists and seers and writers.
Thank you.
ditto.
Wow.
Thank you both. And thank you all. And thank you, Robert, very much for hosting this.
Yes,
very
and I just
welcome.
wanted a quick reminder that we have 2 more wonderful short story writers coming in April and in May. Karen Russell and then Elizabeth Strout.
Thank you, Susan. Yes. We will see you all very soon.
Good.
Happy
Thank
reading.
you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.